and a very, very convincing liar at that. And I'm afraid I cried my eyes out. She only confessed because she wants her freedom at any cost.
But the truth is quite different to that. The truth is quite the opposite to that. It didn't suit her purposes. To confess why? To face the possibility of a new trial for murder? Why? And I believe why, because she'd come to a point in her life where, for whatever reason within herself, she wanted to do what she'd hoped she'd had done 20 years earlier. And she made that difficult step into the truthfulness of facing what happened.
The confession of Myra Hindley was very revealing. It was though she was reading from a prepared script. She could go back and correct and adjust things. I think she was very careful in what she said, particularly in respect of her own role in those murders. She was always, if you like, in the car, over the brow of the hill, in the bathroom. She was never there when it happened, according to her. This Moor is quiet, we're here now. The silence you can almost hear on occasions. She was but a few yards away, but could never give any details of sounds that she heard. Hitherto, of course, we must remember that she was saying that she was innocent, not being involved. That confession shows her in a totally different light. It shows her to be somebody who callously went out to abduct children, knowing what was going to happen to them, knowing that they were going to be abused and murdered.
In spite of the help Brady and Hindley had given him, it wasn't until July 1987, almost a year into their search, that Peter Topping's team did at last find something. A white shoe. And then a body.
Well, naturally, I thought, I'm not selfish, don't get me wrong. I thought it'd be Keith. I was hoping to God it'd be Keith. Because at least I got that, for that moment in time, I got that relief that, oh, he's found, I can have him buried. For my family's sake and my own sake. And once I get him buried, it's an episode that's ended.
It hadn't ended. It wasn't Keith Bennett they found. It was Pauline Reed, who hadn't been seen since 1963 and was now confirmed as the very first victim of the Moors murders.
Well, it was just one living hope all the time, thinking she'd come home, and I was sat with my coat on for about 3 months waiting for daylight to come to run out and see if I could find her. I was just crying and thinking about what had happened in my mind. And I kept thinking about it, and I couldn't sleep through thinking about it, and it built up, and I think that's what caused it, my nervous breakdown. I was in hospital, and I remember my husband saying that Pauline had been found. I remember them, I had 2 nurses brought me home to the funeral. I remember everything about the funeral, everything. I remember following the coffin, and she was at the flowers, and I remember people putting flowers on, throwing flowers down, and I remember putting the dust on Pauline and putting me a flower on. Well, it was as years went on, I was saying my prayers about it, and it seemed to lift me like a cloud, like a cloud lifting off my shoulders, and I began to feel more pleasant about it. Although I never forgot her any day. Even now, I think about her every day. And the way she had to go. It's never to be forgotten, that. Never. And I know how Mrs. Jansen feels, and I know how she'll feel if ever she did find Keith, which I hope she does.
The police never have found the lost boy, Keith Bennett. But before they abandoned the dig, Peter Topping brought Keith's mother, Winnie Johnson, to the moor. He'd interviewed Ian Brady as well as Myra Hindley, and he told Mrs. Johnson what he'd learned.
He took me through the moor and showed me where they dug. And he said, well, Keith was picked up at random. Now, Brady and then they had the cart on the top there. Brady walked down through the gully and he took him down the stream. And Keith asked, he said, oh, it's nice up here. My mum would like it, she'd come up here. And he said, I'll have to go now because my mum will be looking for me. And that was, I think that was actually when he killed him.
Ian Brady was declared mentally ill in 1973. He has said publicly that he will never seek release. Myra Hindley was different. She wanted her freedom. And though every application for parole was turned down, she still had hope. Myra Hindley's predicament continues to attract new supporters.
As I drive around, I'm looking really for the places that Myra described to me. To see Gorton, to see Manchester in a different light. I'd got impressions of it midwinter, and all the horrors that were around, obviously, during the years that her and Ian were committing the crimes, and really wanted to exercise a few ghosts.
Prison officer Joe Chapman became her closest confidant as she waited for a decision about her release.
Myra called me into counsellor at the end of '93. She did feel very guilty for becoming involved in the first place. And there was quite a strong element of remorse there as well, the wanting to turn the clock back. Her thoughts and her plans were that she could be perhaps freed to live in another country, to have space, to live somewhere with a new identity, a new name, a secret address, and that she would continue to be supported by those who were close to her.
Hindley's prison governor at that time of high hopes was Chris Duffin. Once a senior figure in the prison service, she's now taken early retirement. Governing the prison presented Mrs. Duffin with a dilemma: how to secure the safety of her famous inmate without imposing unfair restrictions on her.
It's an extremely tricky path to trot between the two. I certainly know that I was given a very hard time by certain people in the higher echelons of the prison service for actually drawing attention to the fact that Myra's rights were being infringed in ways that I could not see and could not understand the logic of.
Mrs. Duffin ran Cookham for 3 years. During that time, Myra Hindley had to spend months in the sick bay, partly because of her poor health and partly to protect her from attacks by other inmates.
The prison service would tell you there is not a separate rule book for Myra. The reality is there is a separate rule book for Myra. Just a simple thing like going out to hospital for a hospital appointment becomes a major problem if you've got someone like Myra. We had no idea that there were cameras in the bushes. We'd no idea that there was a journalist sitting next to us recording the conversation. And the next day, because my Manchester accent is stronger than Myra's, they actually attributed everything she said to me and everything I said to her. So you have to be very careful. Myra isn't a difficult prisoner. What you have to manage with Myra is everybody else's interest in Myra, which particularly the media, who have actually no scruples whatsoever when it comes to trying to find juicy stories about Myra, many of which, of course, are absolute rubbish.
Rubbish or not, the stories were lurid and sensational. In 1994, leaks to the press from inside the prison introduced a Dutch criminologist. Nina Wilde described Hindley as witty and sensitive.
Nina came onto the scene about 2 months after I arrived at Cookham, and she was brought in as a student placement, really, to do some work experience. And Christine Ellis, the then governor, gave her the opportunity to spend some time with Myra, to study with her, to play Scrabble, to basically have a social relationship with her. I did suspect towards the end of August that the relationship was developing into something more. There was a ring, and rings had been exchanged. So, and this was at a time when Myra and Nina had disclosed to me anyway that it was a love affair and it was a relationship that was going to last. And I had no problem with that at all either. I think that it was good for Myra and it was the way forward for her at that time.
So in 1994, Joe Chapman and Nina Wilde waited to hear if Hindley would ever be freed. She was now within 2 years of reaching her tariff. She'd done 28 of the 30 years set for her. Freedom beckoned for the Moors murderer, a politician's nightmare. The Home Secretary was Michael Howard. The question was when to release Myra Hindley. His answer was simple: never.
Of course, full weight is given to the opinion of both the trial judge and the Lord Chief Justice, but the final decision in these cases is a matter for the Home Secretary.
That final decision devastated her.
I talked to her at length about the suicide risk, and she pointed out to me then that she would never commit suicide because that would in fact send her to hell, and that's the one place she doesn't want to go because her forgiveness is in heaven. I don't think she wants to die in prison. That's really the bottom line.
She'll never win. She'll never, ever win. With all the money she's got behind her, Longfords and Thames and Astor, she'll never win. Yeah.
Bitterly disappointed, Myra Hindley decided to move on. She applied for and won a transfer to Durham Jail in 1995. Nina Wilde moved to Durham too. As for other supporters, Hindley left them behind.
I can't hide the fact that I was disappointed and quite hurt that I was dispatched in the same way as I've seen others in the past. Almost as if I suddenly didn't exist myself, and the counselling process was over. We had developed a friendship, and perhaps I felt that that friendship was stronger than in effect it actually was.
Inside Durham Prison, Hindley now changed her lawyers and started again with a new legal team. Channel 4 has learnt that they intend to challenge a new criterion brought in by Michael Howard, that a Home Secretary ought to take into account the need to maintain public confidence in the criminal justice system. In other words, to listen to public opinion when deciding on Myra Hindley's freedom.
Her behaviour in prison has been satisfactory. Clearly, she's no longer likely to commit the same kind of offence. And thirdly, so it's said, she's come to accept that she was rightly convicted. So in the ordinary way, those factors would point towards early release. But there is this final factor, which is the difficult one. Would early release be acceptable to the public generally? And by the public generally, of course, is not meant pressure groups on one side or on the other side, screaming comments in the tabloid press. It means what would right-thinking people regard as being acceptable? Now, who are right-thinking people? And that's for the Home Secretary to assess.
Daniel, pass me that box down, please. Right, this is just one of the boxes of petitions we did to keep Myra Hindley in prison. The only refusals I did get was 2 at the time, and they was both wearing dog collars, priests apparently. I think public opinion is the most important thing. 99% of people was in favour of the petition because it stands for itself. They was asking for sheets to take back home with them to America, Canada, all over the world, and they was actually posting them to me with hundreds of signatures on them. I mean, these are just a few of we stopped counting when we got into the, you know, the hundreds of thousands. It's just, you know, we'd done enough.
I think it places the Home Secretary in a very difficult position, particularly in a case that is as emotional as Myra Hindley's, because it's easy, if you like, for the Home Secretary to hear public opinion hostile to release of a particular prisoner. It's quite difficult for him to hear above the chorus of hostility public opinion that would favour the release of a particular prisoner.
If they're in for life, they're in for life.
Yeah. I think it's fair that they should be released earlier.
Do you?
Yeah.
Depends what they've done.
Depends if it's what type of murder it was, I think.
Yeah.
If it was cold-blooded or anything.
What about Myra Hindley?
Don't release her. No way.
No release.
No,
at
never,
all.
never, never.
I think she should stay where she is. Life means life as far as she's concerned.
She should be kept in with a key flung away, you know.
If it was a crime of passion,
If
then
we're talking
perhaps...
about Myra Hindley, no.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think it's right. They give a sentence and then all of a sudden they turn around and say, no, you know, no, we're not giving the sentence, we'll give you an extra few 100 years or whatever. So I think she should be released, yeah.
To investigate if the strong views of Manchester shoppers are backed by the British public at large, Channel 4 commissioned a national public opinion poll covering 2,000 people. In our Mori poll, 1 in 10 respondents agree she should be released. But 8 in 10 think she should stay in prison. The voice of public opinion. Should it be allowed to influence an individual case? Myra Hindley's lawyers think not. They're going to ask the High Court exactly which members of the public Michael Howard consulted and how. They hope for a ruling that he acted perversely and that she may have right of appeal.
If Myra Hindley wins in her application for judicial review, the most likely outcome, I expect, will be a return to the original tariff of 30 years. It will then be necessary to refer her case again to the parole board, and if the parole board makes a positive recommendation with regard to her release, it will be up to the Home Secretary to decide whether or not to release her.
And so the issue lands back neatly in the lap of another Home Secretary, a new Labour Home Secretary. Ultimately, Jack Straw alone must decide. Is it right that public opinion should keep Hindley inside forever? Or, as her supporters claim, does natural justice demand that she be freed?
Without any doubts, if I ever got the chance, I would do it. And the rest of my family would. If I actually come face to face with Myra Hindley, she's just dead.
"14 Home Secretaries have come and gone in the years since Myra Hindley last saw the streets where she grew up. Even if she wins her battle in the High Court, she has long since lost the war in the court of public opinion. In Manchester, the families of the victims hold fast to their memories and to their implacable hostility towards a sin that can never be redeemed.
Some sins maybe, but that sin I could never forgive. I say the Lord's Prayer each and every night. As a matter of fact, my husband will tell you he's not in the room. I'm 2 hours saying prayers. But there's one part of the Lord's Prayer I will never ever say, and I never do. And I think you know what that says, so I'm not going to say it for you.
Do you think God will forgive you for not forgiving her?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
I simply object that this woman is not being given British justice like other prisoners. She's not getting the same treatment as other prisoners. That's the whole story, and that needs to be said.
short, sharp shock treatment leads to some very strong language. At boot camp,